Shalom. We are continuing our limud of Shmuel Beis. We're up to Perek Hey, and at this point, we are Avner ben Ner has been killed. Ishbaishes ben Shaul has been killed, and as a result, more and more of Am Yisrael are coming over to David in Hebron, and they are accepting him as their king. Until now, it was mainly Bnei Yehuda, but now more and more people are coming, including people from Binyamin. And that's what Perek Hey begins. V'yavo kol shiftei Yisrael. All of the shvatim of Israel have come to David Chevrona, to David in Hebron. Vayomru lemor, and they declare, Hininu atzmecho b'sorcho anachnu. We are your flesh and blood. We are with you. And gam esmo gam shulshom biyoshol melech oleinu. And in truth, even when Shaul was our king, Ata hayisa motzi v'hamevi es Yisrael. You were the one that really brought us out to battle and brought us back in. You were the one that protected us, al pi Hashem. You were the one that protected us. Vayomer Hashem lecha, and it's Hashem saying to you, David, Ata tire es ami es Yisrael. You will be the shepherd of my nation Yisrael. V'ata tiyel nagid al Yisrael, and you will be the melech over Yisrael. So now David is getting more and more people professing loyalty to him. Vayavo kol ziknei Yisrael el hamelech. All of the zikanim came to the melech Chevrona. Vayichrosh lehem hamelech David bris b'Chevron l'fnei Hashem, and David made a covenant with them, again in the presence of Hashem. That would be in the presence of the Urim B'Tumim. Vayimshechu es David lemelech al Yisrael, and David was anointed to be a melech over all of Yisrael, not only over Shevet Yehuda. And now we're given some important information. Ben ar shaloshim shana David b'malcho. David first became king at the age of 30. Arba'im shana malach, and he was a king for 40 years. But we split his reign into two portions. Bechevron malach al Yehuda sheva shanim b'shisha chadashim. For 7.5 years during this revolt, he ruled in Hebron, but he was only king over the tribe of Yehuda, because the rest of the Jewish people were going with Ishbaishes. Yerushalayim, but now we're going to see that he's going to move to Yerushalayim, Malach Shaloshim v'Shalosh Shana. So actually it's 32.5 years, but you round it off to 33 years. I'll call Yisrael v'Yehuda. So basically we're going to see that the Malchus of Hebron was only over Yehuda, but now, while he's still in Hebron, but it's the very end of the Hebron period, all of the Shvatim are Makabel, and he's going to establish his Malchus in Yerushalayim. So now this parak will discuss the conquest of Yerushalayim. Vayelech hamelech v'anashav Yerushalayim el hayevusi yeshev ha'aretz. So it says here that David and his people go to Yerushalayim, which is occupied by the Yevusim. The Yevusim are one of the 7 nations that we're supposed to destroy, but there were various enclaves that we were not yet matzliach, and the pasuk here seems to say that Yerushalayim was still under the control of the Yevusi, because Yerushalayim ancestrally was Ir HaYevusi. Now the simple meaning of this pasuk is very, very difficult, because the truth of the matter is we read in both Sefer Yahishua and Sefer Shoftim that Yerushalayim was conquered. Part of it was conquered Bimei Yahishua, and part of it was conquered Bimei HaShoftim. So Yerushalayim was already in Jewish hands. So the Mefarshim give us, or Chazal really give us, two interpretations we have to put into this pasuk, which are not lefi pshutai shel mikra. First, when it says Yerushalayim was occupied by the Yevusi, it only means part of Yerushalayim. The part that later became known as Ir David in the south. So there's a part of Yerushalayim, which includes the Harabayas, that David HaMelech wants to conquer, that has not yet been conquered. That's true. So it's not all of Yerushalayim. But the second point is that the Yevusi that are in possession of what later became known as Ir David, because David conquered it, are not Yevusim. They are actually Pelishtim who are living in the area that originally was Yevusi. And the reason why the Shoftim were not able to conquer it was not because they were so strong, but because Avraham made a shavua to Avimelech, Melech Pelishtim, that he would not take away territory until the fourth generation. That means great-grandchildren. Im tishkali lenini lenechti. And right until this time, a great-grandchild of Avimelech was still living in that area. And that's why they couldn't possess it. But now they can, because the last great-grandson of Avimelech died. And that explains some very enigmatic language in the pasuk. The king and his people went to Yerushalayim to the Yevusi. Again, Yevusi means the descendants of Avimelech who are living in the land or the territory of Yevusi. Vayomer leDavid Lamar. And the Yevusi, i.e. the descendants of Avimelech, not all the Plishtim. I mean, we've read plenty of wars against the Plishtim, but these are specifically the descendants of Avimelech. Loi tavai heina, you will not be allowed to enter this city. Ki im hasircha ha'ivrim va'pischim, unless you remove the blind and the lame people, lamar, who are saying to you, Lo Yavai David Heina, David cannot come here. So the truth of the matter is, even in Pshuto Shal Mikra, what does this mean? You cannot come unless you can get rid of the blind people and the lame people that are telling you not to come. So in Pshuto Shal Mikra, this is simply an insult, meaning you guys are so weak that you can't even beat our blind people and our lame people. And you're not going to be able to go in because they're going to stop you. So again, Lefi Pshuto Shel Mikra, it is a mocking taunt. But Chazal have a very intriguing symbolism. And that is, the descendants of Avimelech who were occupying the part of Yerushalayim, the Harabayat and the adjacent area, that is called Ir David, they wanted to have a permanent record that future generations were bound by the covenant of Abraham. So, they had a statue of Yitzchak, who was blind, and a statue of Yaakov, who at least temporarily was lame. And the Ivrim and the Pischim represent Yitzchak and Avram to emphasize that the covenant, Yitzchak and Yaakov, to emphasize that the covenant that Avraham made with Avimelech continues to be binding on Yitzchak and Yaakov, and by extension, Am Yisrael. So their message basically was, unless you can get rid of what these monuments of Ivrim and Pischim represent, you can't come. But their mistake was, they were mistaken actually, because the covenant only applied to a great-grandchild, and there was no great-grandchild of Avimelech that was alive. That person had died. And that's why the pasuk says, Vayilkaid David Eis Mitzudas Sion. David conquered the tower of Tzion, again, that's adjacent to the Harav Yitzchak, and that became the Shetach of Yerushalayim that David named, obviously, or was known as Ir David. Vayomer David Bayomahu, and on that day of victory, David said, Kol Makeh Yevusi Vayiga Batzinor. Anyone that can smite these Yevusim, now that means the Philistines who are the descendants of Abimelech, Vayiga Batzinor, and he will be able to touch or capture Tzinor. Tzinor means the Migdal, this powerful citadel. V'yesa pischim v'yeso ivrim, and he can now remove the lame and the blind. In other words, those statues no longer have any meaning. Senuei nefesh David, that are hated by David. In other words, of course, this, God forbid, this does not mean he hates Yitzchak and Yaakov, but it means that the restrictions of those statues that are hated by David are no longer binding. And this is the source of a popular saying, Al Kain Yaimru, and that's why there is a saying among the people, Iver upiseach la yavoy el habayis. Now, halachically, this means a blind person and a lame person cannot enter the king's palace. Now, this is not an anti-handicap or anti-disability policy. I'm sure that David HaMelech allowed anyone to come in. But the expression is, what it means is, the statue of the Iver, that is Yitzchak, and the statue of the Piseach, that is Yaakov, that represented the covenant that prohibited conquering this part of Yerushalayim, no longer has any entrance, it no longer has any authority to stop us from conquering. So again, these psukim are a little bit difficult, but this is the occasion where David HaMelech completed the conquest of Yerushalayim, the Harav Yitzchak, which he's going to buy in a negotiated transaction, but at least politically, it is now under his control. And he names the area Ir David, and that will be his capital, the holy city. Vayesha David b'Mitzuda, David dwelt in the citadel. Vayikra la Ir David, and he called it the city of David. Vayiven David saviv min hamilo u'baisa, and again, the Milo is kind of a moat. There had been a moat around the citadel, in order that people shouldn't be able to cross it. It wasn't necessarily filled with water, but it was just a sharp depression in the ground. And David built it up. David actually built it up. That's why there is no moat there. He wanted it to be settled and land that people could live on. Vayelech David haloch v'gadol, and David became greater and more powerful. V'Hashem Elokei tzavakot imo, and Hashem was with him. Vayishlach Hiram melech Tzor. Hiram, the king of Tzor, that's Phoenicia. That is a coastal town in Lebanon, north of the Gul Tzfoni, north of the northern boundary of Eretz Yisrael. And we will see that Hiram will later have a very important role in supplying material for the Beis HaMikdash, but at this point we're not doing that yet. But Hiram, the king of Tzor in Phoenicia, Tyre, sent shluchim to David, Atzei Arazim, cedar wood, Chorshe eights, expert carpenters of wood, Chorshe Evan, stone cutters, Evan Kir, Ve'evenu bayis LeDavid, and they built a beautiful palace for David. Now we're going to see later that David then got sad that he sits in a palace and HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not yet have a Beis HaMikdash. But at this point, they built up a house for David. Vayeda David, and David now knows for sure internally, Ki yechinu Hashem lemelech al Yisrael, that Hashem has prepared him to be the melech over all of Yisrael. V'chi nisa mamlachte, and his malchus will be higher and higher. But here are three very important words: Ba'avur amo Yisrael. This is a tremendous yesod. Hashem gave David greatness. Hashem gave David power. Hashem gave David influence. But all of that is to be exercised for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. Das heißt a melech. A melech does not exercise his power for his ego, for his wealth, for his gaiva, for his covet. Everything a melech does is biavor Amo Yisrael. And now we talk about David's family life. Vayikach David od pilagshim v'noshim miYerushalayim acharei bo mechevron. That when he moved from Hebron to Yerushalayim, he took additional pilagshim. So again, what is a pilagash? Pilagash is either a woman without kedushin, a mistress, or a woman with kedushin without a ksuva, which is normally aser. So for a hedjite, a non-melech, pilagash is aser, according to most Rishonim. That's how we paskin. That's the Rambam in the Shulchan Aruch. But a melech is mutter b'pilagash, and he had regular wives that also had kedushin and a ksuva. Vayivoldu aid leDavid banim ubanot, and David had other sons and daughters in Yerushalayim besides the ones that he had already given birth to in Hebron. V'eila shemais hayiludim lo b'Yerushalayim, and these are the names of the children that were born in Yerushalayim. Shamua, we're not told from which wives. Shamua, Shovav, Nasan, Ushlomo, V'yivchar, V'yalishua, V'nefeg, V'yafia, V'yalishama, V'yalyada, V'yalifolet. So how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 extra children. Now it's fascinating, we don't really know who their mothers are other than Shlomo, which is obviously the most important name here, because Shlomo is the one who became king, although he is listed as the fourth son, and we know that Shlomo comes from Bathsheba, but the story of Bathsheba is not going to be said until towards the end of the book of Shmuel Beis. So right now we're not giving that story, but we just mentioned Shlomo by name. Pasuk goes on, Vayishmu Pelishtim ki moshchu es David lemelech al Yisrael. When the Pelishtim heard that David, who had been their great nemesis for so many years, was anointed as the king, Vayalu kol Pelishtim levakesh es David. So now the Pelishtim want to get David. They want to kill him. So David doesn't win. When Shaul is alive, there's Shaul, and then there's Ishbaishes. And when finally that rebellion is over, the Pelishtim want to get him. Vayishma David, Vayerid al Hametzudah. So David sought refuge in his citadel in near David. Uplishtim bo, and the Philistines came, Vayinatshu, and they spread out. Be'emek Rephaim, in the valley of Rephaim. Vayishal David b'Hashem lemer, and David asks Hashem, again this always means via the Urim V'Tumim. Ho'eleh el Pelishtim. Two questions. Shall I wage war against the Pelishtim? Number one. Question two. Hatidneim biyadi. Will I be victorious? Vayomer Hashem el David. Alei, fight them. Ki noson etein es haPelishtim biyadecha. I will deliver the Pelishtim into your hands. Vayavai David b'Baal Peratzim, and David came to the town of Baal Peratzim. We'll see why it's called that name. Vayakem Shem David, and David was able to be menatseach that milchama. Vayomer Paratz Hashem es oivai lefanai. Hashem has broken through the enemy. It's as if the enemy was a solid wall, and I was able to break through. Hashem has broken through my enemies. Keperetz hamayim, like water breaking through a dam. And Al Kain Kara Shema Makomahu Baal Peratzim, the place of Peratzim, the place of breakages, because Hashem allowed me to break through the powerful armies of the enemy. Vayazru Shemes Hazabeyim, and when the Pelishtim fled, they abandoned their idols. They left a lot of their Avodah Zarah. Vayisoem David v'anashav, and David and his soldiers carried it away. Now again, Lefi Pshutai, one would have thought they kept it. Chazal understand, and the Targum says, V'yukdinon, they burned it, they destroyed the Avodah Zarah, which Al Pidin you're supposed to do. So the Pelishtim came back a second time. Vayosifu od Pelishtim lialot. The Pelishtim then continued to wage war. Vayinatshu be'emek Rephaim, and they spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And again, Vayishal David Bashem Vayomer Loisale. Here, Hashem said, do not go out. Now, we don't know exactly what the cheshbon of Hashem is, why one time you'll be menatzeach, one time you won't be menatzeach. Ein lanu esek b'nistaros, we don't really understand. But Hashem said, in this case, you have to have a different strategy. Lo tala, do not come out and face them frontally. Hasev el achareim, ambush them from the back. Ubaso lahem, and you should attack them mimol b'chaim, from where the trees are. Apparently, in the back of the Pelishtim army, there was a forest of trees. Get your army to the back and attack them from those trees. Vayehi. This is what, again, the Urim V'Tumim communicated this somehow. A lot of letters would have to light up. B'shamacha, or kishamacha, eskol tza'ada b'rashei ha'b'chaim. When you hear kind of a shouting or a movement from the tops of the trees, the Medrash says that this means the malachim are coming to help you, the angels from heaven. When you hear the rustling of the trees, that's a siman that the malachim are with you. Az techaratz, then you shall move. Ki az yotza Hashem lefanecha, because that is a sign that Hashem is in front of you. Lahakais, to smite the machaneh Pelishtim. And the pasuk says, Vayas David Cain, kasher tzivo Hashem. David followed this direction as Hashem commanded, and the second time as well. Vayach es haPelishtim migeva ad boach hagazer, and he was able to smite the Pelishtim. In other words, the Pelishtim were fleeing. He pursued them from Geva until the road, the highway that takes you to Gezer, that's Boacha, the highway, the road that takes you to Gezer, which was a Philistine city, and then they abandoned the pursuit and let the Pelishtim go. So the truth is, the Pelishtim we never get rid of. I mean, we get rid of them much later. We simply fight them, and we wait to fight them yet another day.